On behalf of Akuno Senko for Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope. Hope. We're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know. Every day, one step at a time, man. We gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Yeah. Sometimes I practice focus, thought, and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate. And seeking knowledge make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
All right, peace, family. This is going to be a solo study session. We're going to jump right into it. I want to say I appreciate y'all for following my platform. You know, y'all have been a big part of motivation for me to keep doing this. But today's subject, I want to go over the boomers and Sooners. Boomers and Sooners, the Oklahoma land rush of 1889. Why do I want to go over the boomers and Sooners? Because those of us who are from Oklahoma are familiar with the term boomer Sooners. But where did this term come from? Boomer Sooners. Well, let's deal with the Oklahoma land rush of 1889. This was written September 11th, 2020 by Jenny Ashcraft. It reads as follows. In 1889, as many as 50,000 settlers poured into Oklahoma, hoping to stake claim to a portion of nearly 2 million acres open for settlement by the U.S. government. 50,000 settlers, 2 million acres of land, issued by the U.S. government. Let's get into it. Many had campaigned the federal government to open the land for settlement and were known as boomers. The land, formerly occupied by Native Americans, was considered unassigned land after the federal government forcibly relocated many Native American tribes. It says that the federal government forcibly relocated Native American tribes. They were pushing people out their homes or out their locations. On April 22nd, 1889, at noon sharp, 12 p.m., a bugle sounded and hopeful settlers surged across the territory line. The number of settlers surpassed available land, and they soon realized that some snuck into Oklahoma ahead of April 22nd's open date. This gave them a leg up on the law-abiding settlers and first in line for the most desirable land. Those early homestead seekers were known as Sooners. So, right here, you have those who were early homestead seekers who were known as the Sooners, and then you had those right here who had campaigned for the land, who fought for that or argued for that land, campaigned for that land. They were called the boomers. Get into it. In 1887, the Dawes Act, which I don't know if y'all know about the Dawes Roll. Let's get into the Dawes Roll real quick. How would I pull it up on her? Let's see. Right here. Wow, Dawes Roll, right? Paying to play Indian. Paying to play Indian. The Dawes Roll and legacy of the $5 Indian.
In the late 1800s, there was something called the Dawes Rolls, which was basically a census that made records of people's ethnic backgrounds in order to determine which Native American tribes would get certain land allotments and other benefits. After slavery, many black people were associated with some of these tribes by bloodline, through marriage, through adoption, and even servitude. And because they were associated with these tribes, many black people were entitled to some of these benefits. The government did not want blacks to get these benefits, so they created a separate freedmen's list specifically for black people. They also started to list any full-blooded Native American who had African features as black because they didn't want them getting those benefits either. At the same time, they allowed white citizens to come in and pay money under the table to be listed as part Native American. 1895, 1896, when a lot of the whites found out the benefits that these blacks are going to be entitled to, a lot of whites went to the Dawes Commission and say, look, why don't you put my name on there? They said, but you're not an Indian. So that's what they said, well, I'll give you $5. So the rule got around, the policy got around that for $5, that a white could put his name on the Dawes rolls and be called himself an Indian and be entitled all these benefits, and all their children could be entitled all these benefits forever. And so that became known as what's called a $5 Indian. And so if you go around now and check most of the Indians, the so-called Indians in America, about 90% of them are not even Indians. Those are just whites now who are passing as Indians. But they're getting all the benefits. And they're not paying any taxes, getting free college education. They put up a little reservation on the land that they don't live on. They have another home off and get all kind of benefits.
It may be fashionable to play Indian now, but it was only trendy 125 years ago when people paid $5 a piece for falsified documents declaring them as natives of the Dawes roll. We'll get back into that here in a second. Let's get back to this Boomer Sooners. I just want to touch that. So in 1887, the Dawes Act. This is a $5 Indian Act. In 1887, the Dawes Act was one of the many federal laws that slowly stripped Native Americans of their tribal lands and paved the way for the Oklahoman land rush. It authorized the government to break up the tribal lands and allot them to individual Native Americans in parcel of 40, 80, and 160 acres. Only Native Americans who accepted the land could become U.S. citizens, and any remaining land would be made available for public sale. Excuse me. The Indian Appropriation Act of 1889, also known as the Sooner Clause. Or that word Sooner again. The Sooner Clause opened these unassigned lands to settlers, but specified that anyone who entered Indian territory ahead of time would be denied land. There were, however, a group of legal Sooners who had permission to enter the territory ahead of time. This group included government employees, railroad workers, and others with special permission. Now, government employees, railroad workers, and people with special privileges. Look at all the railroads in Oklahoma. Look at what took place with Black Wall Street and how the Klansmen, or the Tulsa Police Department gave Klansmen members badges to be police officers. So this is just a repeat of what they did then and what they did then. Given that special permission for certain or selective group of people. Let's say, all right, let's get into it. In some instances, legal Sooners took advantage of their positions to drive off early settlers, sending them back to the back of the line, only to turn back and stake claim of the same property. In the weeks leading up to the land grab, wagon trains snaked through neighboring states, many making their way to border towns. One newspaper reported a line of wagons 60 miles long. It wasn't just men hoping to stake a claim. Women were among those hoping to establish a homestead on some of these best unoccupied lands in the country. I just had to tell myself I didn't break down to y'all what homestead was. Let me get into it. Where is it at? Let's go right here. Homestead Act. All right, so about the Homestead Act, let's get into this. The Homestead Act, enacted during the Civil War of 1862, provided that any adult citizen or intended citizen who had never borne arms against the U.S. government could claim 160 acres of surveyed government land. So basically, anybody who was becoming a citizen or intended to be a citizen of this new government, as long as you didn't go to war with this government, you were given 160 acres of land, which they were giving other Europeans or other Albions our ancestral land. Now let's take it back where we was. All right, so women were among those hoping to establish a homestead on some of the best unoccupied public land in the country. The move was jubilant in border towns as crowds awaited the noon hours on the 22nd. Some abandoned their horses in favor of trains, hoping to get there faster. One newspaper reported that men packed the roof of rail cars after the coaches filled up. Settlers had two ways to initiate a claim. The first was to file a claim at the land office. The second was to personally settle on a piece of land. If a conflict arose between two parties trying to claim the same land, priority went to those physically on the land. So, again, let's reread that. They had two claims. The first one was to go file it at the land office. So you could just claim somebody's land at the land office. And then the second one was just go post up there. Just go take it. Just go sit there. And if you or somebody else were to argue on the land, priority went to those physically on the land. So those who first come, first serve. When the clock struck noon, or 12 on the 22nd, the mad rush began. Those who snuck into the territory early concealed themselves in ravines and bushes, and when the bugle sounded, seemed to rise right up out of the ground to claim the property. Thousands poured into Guthrie, Oklahoma, which saw its population go from 10 in the morning to 15,000 by nightfall. Oklahoma City experienced similar growth, and there were more than 11,000 filing for homestead land by the end of the day. Bitter resentment arose towards Sooners who entered the territory early. This led to many court cases for years to come, where litigants protested hundreds of claims. The loss of tribal lands further marginalized Native Americans who saw additional land rushes take more tribal lands in subsequent years. In 1890, the unassigned lands became the Oklahoma Territory, and in 1907, Oklahoma became the 46th state. To learn more about Oklahoma land rush, search newspapers.com today, blah, blah. But, all right, so what it said, 1907. Well, let's see how long this thing lasted. Between 1862 and 1934, the federal government granted 1.6 million homesteads and distributed 270 million acres, 420,000 square miles of federal land and private ownership. When did the Homestead Act of 1862 end? The passage of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 repealed the Homestead Act and a 48 contiguous states, but it did grant 10-year extension on claims. So, from 1862 until 1976, that's over 100 years. For over 100 years, they took the land from the indigenous people and reclassified the original people as Indians first, then as Negroes, then as Blacks, Colors, Ethiopians, etc., while reclassifying themselves from German, Dutch, Italian, French, Scottish, Ireland, etc., to white, to these native tribes that they try to claim today. And so what I want to do is go over the Naturalization Act and also why they claim to be those quote unquote tribes that they claim to be today. What benefits do they get from this Naturalization Act of 1790? And also what benefits they get from claiming your ancestral rights for claiming to be native to the land or claiming to be indigenous or the Indians of the land. This 1790 Act set the new nation's naturalization procedures. It limited access to U.S. citizenship to white immigrants. In effect, to people from Western Europe who have resided in the U.S. at least 2 years and their children under 21 of age. It also granted citizenship to children born aboard to U.S. citizens. And it says, who did this act exclude? The law limited naturalization to free white persons or good character, thus excluded Native Americans, indentured servants, enslaved people, free Black people, and later Asians. Although free Black people were allowed citizenship at the state level in many states. And so again, this act benefited them by taking the land, or as you see where it says, in good character. Now let's go into where I was there earlier. You know, we talked about the Dawes Roll and the $5 Indians. We went over this. So these so-called $5 Indians paid the government agents under the table in order to reap the benefits that came with having Indian blood. Mainly white men with an appetite for land, $5 Indians paid to register on the Dawes rolls, earning fraudulent enrollment in tribes along with benefits inherited by generations to come. There were opportunistic white men who wanted access to the land or food rations, said Gregory Smithers, associate professor of history at Virginia Commonwealth University. These were people who were more than happy to exploit the Dawes Commission and government agents for $5, were willing to turn a blind eye to graft and corruption. These were people who were more than happy to exploit the Dawes Commission and government agents for $5, willing to turn a blind eye to graft and corruption. So they knew what was going on. For $5, they would take that money. The Dawes Commission, established in 1893 to enforce the General Allotment Act of 1887, or the Dawes Act, was charged with convincing tribes to cede their land to the United States and dividing remaining land into individual allotments. The commissions also required Indians to claim membership in only one tribe and registered on the Dawes Roll, what the government meant to be a definitive record of individuals with Indian blood. Reservation dogs, huh? Where you think those reservations were? On our land. The Curtis Act, passed in 1898, targeted the 5 civilized tribes: Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole. I have 3 out of those 5 tribes in me. Forcing them to accept the allotment and register on the Dawes Roll. The 2 acts, which came during a period of murky social context after the Civil War when white and Black men were intermarrying with Native American women, aimed to help the government keep track of real Indians while accelerating efforts to assimilate Indian people into white culture, Smithers said. But you get the point. By 1865, African American and white Americans were moving into the Midwest, into the Indians and Oklahoma territories, all vying for some patch of land they could call their own and live out their Jeffersonian views of independence, he said. The federal government poured a lot of effort and energy into the Dawes Commission, but at the same time, it was very hard for both Native and American governments to keep track of who was who. There was too much going on for them. The Dawes Commission set up a tent with Indian territories, said Bill Wedge, Director Emeritus of the Oklahoma Historian Society, Office of American Indian Culture and Preservation. Their field clerks scored written records, took oral testimony, and generated enrollment cards for individuals determined to have Indian blood. So your Indian cards came in at. This is to determine who had blood or not, who was a real Indian and who was not. This is why a lot of them have their cards and claim to be something that they're not. If you look at the bloodline on those cards, they say they got more blood than they really do on there. It's $5 Indians. Something else I wanted to touch on. Free white persons in the Black's Law Dictionary. All right, so let's read the free white persons in the Black's Law Dictionary, right? So y'all don't think this is just something I made up. Free white persons. Free white persons referred to in the Naturalization Act as amended by Act July 14th, 1870, has meaning naturally given to it when first used in one stat 103C3, meaning all persons belonging to European races and commonly counted as white, and their descendants, including such descendants in other countries to which they have immigrated. It says, it included all European Jews more or less intermixed with people of Celtic, Scandinavian, Teutonic, Iberian, Latin, Greek, and Slavic descent. It includes Magyars, Lapps, and Finns, and the Basque and Albanians. It includes the mixed Latin, Celtic, Iberian, and Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. The mixed Greek, Latin, Phoenician, Phoenician, and North African inhabitants of Sicily, and the mixed Slav and Tartar inhabitants of South Russia. Now, here's where it gets tricky. It says, it does not mean Caucasian race. Make sure y'all see this. It does not mean Caucasian race, Aryan race, or Indo-European races, nor the mixed Indo-European, Dravidian, Semitic, or Mongolian people who inhabited Persia. A Syrian of Asiatic birth and descent will not be entitled to become a naturalized citizen of the United States as being a free white person. So, tells you right here in the law, they are not white. It's a status, not a people. And if anybody would be classified as white, it would be you of melanated skin, because it did say people of North African descent and also those Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. So the Moors are classified as free white people, but you want to be Black, Negro, colored, African American, etc., and wonder why you receive these mistreatments. Don't expect anybody else to treat you properly if you don't treat yourself properly.